Most resentment in a relationship doesn't come from what you didn't do, it comes from what you kept doing. And stay with me because this is not how people think resentment starts. Because this right here, this sounds simple on the surface, but it goes much deeper than most people realize. Because when something starts from love, you don't question it, you don't measure it, you don't keep track of it, you don't stop and ask yourself if it's balanced yet. You just do it. And that's what makes this so easy to miss in the beginning. Because when it starts, it doesn't feel heavy. It doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like pressure. It feels good. It feels right. It feels natural. You're not doing it because somebody demanded it. You're not doing it because somebody assigned it to you. You're doing it because love made you want to. And that matters. Because there is a real difference between something you do from love and something you do from obligation. But in the beginning, you're not thinking that far ahead. You're not thinking about patterns. You're not thinking about what this may turn into later. You just think you're being loving. You just think you're being thoughtful. You just think this is what it looks like to care for somebody. This is what it looks like to show up. This is what it looks like to love well. And in that moment, nothing feels wrong. Nothing feels off. Nothing someone feels one-sided. Everything feels intentional. Everything feels connected. Everything feels like it fits. And that is why this stage is so easy to miss. Because you don't even realize yet you may be building a rhythm that one day will turn into an expectation. But in the beginning, that's not how it feels. It feels like love. It feels like generosity. It feels like care in motion. You start doing something out of love, cooking, cleaning, making coffee, fixing their plate, filling up the gas tank, remembering the things they forget, handling little details before they ever have to ask, doing the small things that make life easier for the person you love. And let me slow this down right here because this part matters. When it starts, it feels good. It feels intentional. It feels meaningful. It feels like I want to do this. Now I'm trapped into it. Not because this has become my assigned role, but because I genuinely want to care for the person I love. And there is a difference, a real difference. Because when something comes from wanting to, it carries a lighter energy. It doesn't feel like strain. It doesn't feel like pressure. It doesn't feel like sacrifice yet. It feels like joy. It feels like closeness. It feels like the kind of thing you don't mind doing because your heart is in it and you don't even think to score. You're not counting how many times you've done it. You're not tracking whether it's being matched. You're not asking whether they fully understand what it cost you. You're showing up. And in the beginning, that showing up feels beautiful. It feels like connection. It feels like the quiet language of love. But this is where a lot of people don't realize they are standing at the beginning of something. Because what starts as love can slowly turn into something heavier if it is not recognized for what it is. Not because love was fake, not because the care was not real, not because the relationship was broken from the start, but because repeated behavior has a way of becoming part of the structure. And once something becomes part of the structure, it no longer gets seen the same way it did in the beginning. And that is where the shift begins. Now, over time, something starts to shift, and it doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, almost so quietly you may not notice it at first. And I want to stay here for a moment because this is where the change begins. What used to feel intentional now starts to feel normal, not special, not especially meaningful, not something that stands out anymore, just part of the routine, just part of how life works, just part of what happens in the relationship. You still do it. Nothing has changed on the surface. You're still cooking, still cleaning, still making coffee, still handling the little things, still carrying certain pieces of the everyday life, still doing the small things that once felt sweet and full of care. But something inside you is starting to feel different. And let me explain what I mean by that, because this is subtle. This is not the kind of thing that usually comes with a big conversation. This is not the kind of thing people always have language for right away. But they feel it. Because when something becomes normal, it starts to lose its visibility. It becomes expected behavior instead of appreciated effort. And now, what used to feel like care just feels like something that happens, something automatic, something built into the day, something no longer noticed in the same way. And on the other side, they may not even notice the shift. Not because they are cruel, not because they don't care, not because they are trying to take advantage, but because they've adjusted to it. They've gotten used to it. They've come to experience it as part of normal life. And when people get used to something, they stop seeing it the same way. Not intentionally, just naturally. What used to stand out now blends in. What used to feel special now feels standard. And this is where misunderstanding begins. Because now, one person still feels like they're giving, and the other person just sees it as normal life. And nobody is saying anything. That's the part. Nobody is saying anything. There's no big discussion, no real pause, no moment where both people sit down and say, wait a minute, something has changed in how this feels. So the pattern just keeps going. One keeps doing, the other keeps receiving, and life keeps moving. But emotionally, something has shifted. Because when effort becomes invisible, it starts to feel different to the person giving it. Now, you may still do the same thing, but the feeling behind it is no longer exactly the same. Because what just to feel seen now feels assumed. What used to feel appreciated now feels absorbed into the background. And that is where confusion starts to grow. Because now you may be wondering, why does this feel different to me? I'm still doing the same thing. They're still receiving it. The routine hasn't changed. So why does it not feel the same anymore? Because visibility changed. That's why. Meaning changed. Recognition changed. And when recognition changes, emotion changes too. Because people can do a lot when they feel seen in what they do. People can give a lot when they feel like it still carries meaning. But when effort starts disappearing into routine, something begins to shift inside the person carrying it. And again, that shift is not always loud. Sometimes it just sounds like quiet disappointment. Sometimes it just feels like a little heaviness. Sometimes it just shows up as a thought you can't fully explain. It just doesn't feel the same anymore. And that feeling matters because that feeling is the beginning of awareness. That feeling is the early signal that what once felt mutual and meaning is now being experienced differently on both sides. And when that happens, if nobody notices it, the pattern keeps moving. And what keeps moving keeps deepening until normal becomes something even heavier. And now, let's go a little deeper because this is where it really starts to settle in. What was once normal now becomes expected. And I want to slow this part down because this is where feelings start to change in a bigger way. Now is no longer, I appreciate that you did that. Now it's, that's just what you do. And those are not the same. Not emotionally, not mentally, not over time. Because when something becomes expected, it stops feeling like a choice. It starts feeling like a responsibility. And there's a difference between being appreciated for something and being relied on for it. There's a difference between somebody receiving your care and somebody building their comfort around your consistency. Because once people settle into an expectation, your effort stops feeling optional. Now it feels built in. Now it feels assumed. Now it feels like part of the contract, even if nobody ever said it out loud. And that is where pressure starts to build. Because now, if you don't do it, something feels off. Something feels missing. Something feels wrong. Not always because the act itself was huge, but because the pattern became part of the relationship. Now, if you don't make the coffee, it gets noticed. If you don't handle the little task, it gets noticed. If you don't keep doing the thing that you once did freely from love, it creates a disruption. And now the question is no longer, do I want to do this? Now the pressure becomes, what happens if I don't? And that is a very different emotional space, because now you're not just doing it out of love. You're doing it to maintain peace, to avoid questions, to avoid tension, to avoid disappointment, to avoid that uncomfortable feeling of, why didn't you do it? What happened? You always do that. And let me sit right here for a moment, because this part is important. You didn't sign up for expectation. You started from love. You didn't begin with a contract in your hand. You began with care in your heart. You began with willingness. You began with tenderness. You began with the desire to make life lighter for someone you loved. But somewhere along the way, that love turned into obligation. And obligation feels different. It feels heavier. It feels less free. It feels less appreciated. It feels like something you carry instead of something you give. And that emotional shift matters, because once love starts feeling like obligation, it changes how the act lands inside of you. Now, even if you keep doing it, it doesn't feel the same. Now, the same action carries a different emotional weight. Now, what used to feel generous starts to feel draining. What used to feel sweet starts to feel expected. What used to feel like an offering starts to feel like a role. And roles can get heavy, especially when they were never consciously chosen as permanent. And on the other side, they may not even realize this shift has happened. They may not understand why you feel heavier, why your tone changed, why your energy feels different. Because from their side, nothing changed. They are just living inside what has become normal for them. They are responding to the pattern as it exists now. And now, both people are in two different emotional spaces without even knowing it. One person is feeling the weight. The other person is feeling the comfort of routine. One person is feeling obligation. The other person is feeling stability. One person is wondering why this feels heavy now. The other person is wondering why the energy feels different. And when two people are in different emotional realities, but nobody is naming it, misunderstanding starts growing. Because now one person may feel unappreciated. and the other person may feel confused. One person may feel tired, and the other person may feel surprised. One person may be saying silently, "I'm carrying something that doesn't feel the same anymore." And the other person may be saying silently, "I don't understand why this suddenly feels different." And that gap right there, that unnamed gap, is where emotional distance can start forming. Not because anybody stopped loving, but because something shifted and nobody translated the change. Nobody explained the feeling. Nobody named the pattern. Nobody stopped long enough to ask, when did this stop feeling like love and start feeling like pressure? And that question matters, because if it doesn't get asked, people stay stuck inside the pattern. And that's when the relationship begins to feel the weight of something that was never meant to become this heavy. And this is where resentment begins. Not loudly, not suddenly, but quietly, through repetition, through feeling, through moments that weren't acknowledged. And let me stay right here for a moment, because this is the part that matters most. Resentment doesn't usually come from one big thing. It builds from small experiences that kept happening, from effort that stopped feeling seen, from actions that stopped feeling appreciated, from giving that slowly started to feel one-sided. And resentment is tricky like that, because from the outside, the actions may still look exactly the same. You're still doing the same things, still showing up, still carrying what you've been carrying, still moving in the same routine. But inside, it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel seen the same. It doesn't feel valued the same. It doesn't feel received the same. And that feeling, that is where the shift happens inside of you. That is where the emotion starts changing. Because now you're not just doing something. Now you're feeling something while doing it. Now the act itself is carrying history. Now the action is no longer neutral. It is tied to a feeling of being overlooked, a feeling of being assumed, a feeling of being depended on in a way that no longer feels mutual. And over time, those feelings build, little by little, quietly. They build in your tone. They build in your patience. They build in your energy. They build in the way you respond. Because when something stops feeling appreciated, but never stops being required, the heart starts reacting, even if the mouth hasn't said anything yet. And at the same time, on the other side, they may feel something too. They may feel confusion. They may feel distance. They may feel a change in your energy. They may feel like something is different, but I don't know what. I can tell something shifted, but I don't understand where. And that is what makes this so hard, because now both people are feeling something, but nobody is saying it. One is feeling burden. The other is feeling confusion. One is feeling strain. The other is feeling a quiet loss of ease. And that silence, that is where disconnection begins. because silence has a way of letting feelings grow without giving them language. And feelings without language usually do not heal themselves. They deepen, they spread, they start affecting the whole atmosphere of the relationship. And now, what started as a simple, loving habit has become emotionally loaded, not because love was fake, but because meaning changed and nobody talked about it. So now I want you to think about this for a moment. What is something you started doing out of love that doesn't feel the same anymore? Not because you stopped caring, but because something about it changed. And maybe you didn't even realize when it happened. Maybe you just woke up one day and it felt heavier. Maybe you just noticed one day that what used to feel light now feels like something you have to push through. Maybe the act didn't change. Maybe the feeling did. And this is where my grandmother's words come in. Because this right here, this is wisdom. She said, don't start doing something that you don't want to see yourself doing. 5, 10, 15, 20, or even 30 years down the road. Because when you stop, it's going to be a problem. And let me sit with that for a moment. Because that's not just marriage advice. That's life wisdom. Because what you consistently do, people build expectations around. That is just human nature. What keeps happening starts to feel permanent. What is repeated starts to feel built in. What is consistently given starts to feel like part of the relationship itself. And when that consistency changes, it creates a shift. Not because something is automatically wrong, but because something changed. And change always has to be understood. It has to be acknowledged. It has to be communicated. Because if it is not, people will create their own meaning around it. One person may think, you don't appreciate me. The other may think, you're pulling away from me. One person may think, I'm tired of carrying this. The other may think, I don't know why you've changed. And now both people are hurting from the same pattern, but in different ways. That is why patterns matter. That is why repeated actions matter. That is why small things matter. Because relationships are built in repetition, not just in the big moments, in the little ones, and what is done over and over again. And life has a way of showing you that what she said was true. Because when something becomes a pattern, it becomes part of the relationship. And when that pattern shifts, it has to be talked about. It has to be understood. It has to be acknowledged. Because if it's not, it turns into resentment. But if it is, it can turn into awareness. And awareness changes everything. Awareness gives language to the feeling. Awareness helps both people see what changed. Awareness allows the relationship to stop reacting blindly and start responding with understanding. And once there is awareness, there is opportunity. Opportunity to adjust. Opportunity to communicate. Opportunity to say, this started from love, but somewhere along the way, it became heavy for me. Opportunity to say, I didn't know this no longer felt good to you. Opportunity to say, let's talk about what changed before this grows into something deeper. Because long marriages are not built on never changing. They are built on recognizing when something has changed and choosing to work through it together. They are built on being honest about what no longer feels good. They are built on being willing to name patterns before patterns name the whole atmosphere of the relationship. They are built on not waiting until resentment is fully grown before somebody finally says what has been going on. Because once something is named, it can be addressed. Once something is understood, it can be adjusted. Once something is acknowledged, it no longer has to keep growing silently. And that is how you protect the relationship before something small turns into something you feel every day.